different options for Europa. I'm going to be doing a few different videos to explain a lot of the ins and outs of the games. Probably one of the most complicated strategy games I've ever played. I figured that this would be a good start, going over the basic options, etc., in case people weren't clear about the different things that they could do in the game or the different things they could have control over and what they did. So let's just jump right into it. We're not going to go over base game options because they're simple options. They're very self-explanatory. Versus the options in the game itself are a little more intuitive. There's a bit more to them. So under your general options, you're going to have difficulty. Difficulty is self-explanatory, but the one thing that people might not know is that you can actually check what the difficulty is going to do. I normally play on hard. Some people play on very hard, which is the hardest difficulty in the game. Some people go down to very easy. They give it gives massive bonuses to the player. But these are pretty self-explanatory in terms of just the fact that you can see it gives different bonuses based on hovering over it. What those different bonuses are, I'll address in a different section than this, because there's so much to this game that I'll probably end up having a crap ton of segments on it. I don't know. I would guess at least 5 to 10 videos trying to explain a lot of this stuff. Lucky Nations, once again, it tells you what it does. I don't like to do it because it specifically applies to only AI nations. It does not apply to anything else. Any players will not be able to get this. It gives AI nations massive bonuses, which seems very silly to me. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. The only reason I'd play with this is if I really wanted to give myself a much harder time playing the game. And if I was going to do that, I'd just switch up to very hard, since very hard gives massive bonuses anyways. Playing on hard already makes the AI quite a bit stronger, and is my normal difficulty now. So like I said, I'm not going to switch Lucky Nations on unless I want a much harder game. So I just leave it off usually when I'm playing. Terra Incognita and Lobby, that's the Fog of War. So when you're in the lobby loading up a game, do you want the Fog of War to be on or off? Since Fog of War doesn't really play, and I can't even call it Fog of War because that's not really what it is. Essentially, it's a fog of discovery. If you haven't discovered a part of the world, then it's going to be covered by a white fog. You won't be able to see what's going on there. The only times you'll be able to see through the fog is if you can see other nations. If you've met other nations, you can see their capitals. That's about it. If you've met them diplomatically, essentially. Otherwise, there you're going to have a fog covering everything that you haven't discovered. That's specifically prevalent for the Americas. So it's not really a big deal to have it on or off. And it's nice a lot of times if you're loading up a game to see how the rest of the world's doing compared to yourself. If you want to see, what your big challenges are going to be, or if you're falling behind, stuff like that. If another nation's, kind of running away with the game, stuff. It's also nice in multiplayer just so you can kind of check out what's happening. Once again, in this, Terra Incognita is not a big deal. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to really gain or lose any advantages or disadvantages having Terra Incognita on. So most of us have a preference of having it turned off. Dynamic province names, that's just based on how provinces are going to be named once you own them. And hello, Mr. Sir. So dynamic province names, it's just going to name it just like it says, based on the cultural group, stuff like that. So if you take over a province, let's say, and you're French versus someone who's Germanic, and you take over one of their provinces is going to be renamed based on French culture. And the way the French would, pronounce the province name or what they would call it. That's all dynamic province name is going to do. It's kind of nice for... what would you call it? Immersion? Yeah, dynamic province name is nice for immersion, and that's why. It also gives some kind of unique and silly names sometimes when you take over a province way the heck on the other side of the world. So, but yeah, so it's just a little immersion, like Mr. Sir has just said. It's a little bit of flavor for the game. It's fun. Monthly tax income. I mean, it just pops up numbers on the map is all it does, really. It kind of clutters things. I have it turned off because I don't like to bother seeing it. Like I said, it's just more clutter, visual clutter, and you already have enough information to process anyways. And you can access that tax income information elsewhere. So I don't like to clutter up my map with visual clutter like that. Color owned wastelands. That's just to show who owns the majority of an area. So you'll have wasteland provinces that you can't colonize, that you can't take over. Mountains, stuff like that. So if you own a majority of territory around the province, it'll then color it into your nation's color and essentially show that your nation pretty much controls that area or owns that province. It's nice for, once again, just visually, so that you can see. So if you take over the area around here, excuse me. Geez, pardon me. Working right through the Afghanistan area over into India, it's nice to have one big contiguous empire rather than having it broken up by wasteland provinces in the middle. Because then you can have, one big empire name, one big color, stuff like that. So it's, once again, just a preference. Excuse me. Yeah, it makes nations, the downside, like Mr. Sir is kind of alluding to, is it can make nations seem bigger than they really are. Because you could take over super big wasteland provinces that all of a sudden make your nation look far larger. Especially like here over in the Tibet region. Getting that colored in can make a lot of these nations seem a lot bigger than they really are. It happens plenty of times since I play in India. So makes them seem like way more of a threat. So until you're more experienced with the game, you're not really going to... a lot of times it's going to throw off your estimation of that nation's strength. So, excuse me. And that's a good point, Mr. Sir. Yeah, it can also make it seem like you can travel right through an area, whereas you actually have to go around it for Wasteland Province stuff. So, until you're more familiar with the game and the Wasteland Provinces and whatnot, you see there's a whole ton over here in the Southeast Asia area. You might be surprised thinking that you could get troops just straight through an area, but then they have to actually walk around. So there's positive and negatives. I did leave it turned on because I'm familiar enough with the game to where it doesn't affect my estimations or my judgments of where my units are going to go. So, exclaves use region name. So that just means when you take over an area, like let's say you take over part of Canada or whatnot when you colonize. What it means is that the area is going to be then called, French Canada until you get a colonialization there. Excuse me. That's all it is. It just kind of, rather than just calling it France, because normally if you have that turned off, as you're colonizing over here, it'll just name this area France. I like to have it with, it's once again just a preference. So, just because it's nice sometimes to see, what's it called? French Australia, stuff like that. So, it's just cool sometimes to see different things like that in the game, different names like that. It's, once again, just a preference. Doesn't matter. Now, limits on idea groups. I usually have that turned on because otherwise you are limited. It will force you to choose different idea groups as you're going up through the game, which are kind of part of your technology in this game and something I'll go over later. I like to have no limits on idea groups because I like the freedom to choose whatever I think is best suited for my current position and situation. And as far as I know, most players prefer that as well. Fantasy Random New World, that's just whether or not you have some super highly advanced nations be able to appear in the New World. It's essentially part of the randomized New World options. To where you could have, super advanced native nations over here to where when you arrive, they have better technology than you. It's essentially kind of the basic idea behind it. So, yeah, but that only matters, like Mr. Sir said here, if you're using Random New World. So I never worry about it. Yeah, the start screen, once again, just a preference. It's just options. Obviously, we're not in a multiplayer lobby, so we don't have multiplayer options, which aren't really a big deal anyways. So custom nation setup, we'll go over this as well since it's just part of the options. This is enabled by one of the DLCs in the game, which is Road to El Dorado. Custom nations are a fun little part of the game that I really encourage everyone to get for one of the DLCs they buy, simply because it adds a lot more options for gameplay. If you want to play something beyond the base game and not use mods, or even using mods, custom nations can add a lot of fun options to it and give you a lot more hours that you can sink into the game. Custom nation difficulty, your normal is basically 200 points. Points are taken up by everything because you have provinces in the game. So provinces here will take points. Different techs will take points. Essentially, there's every little thing that you can affect with your nation will take points. And this just essentially tells you how many points you can use. So you can set that as low as you want, all the way down to 50, all the way up to 800 for very easy. 200 is kind of your basic point value. Province tax and manpower. Normal values means it'll have the normal values that it already has in the game. Whereas you could turn it to random, to where all of this will be randomized, the development, etc. You could also have flat values to where everything is worth the exact same. Nations normal setup. You can do historical setup, which is where it's historical nations. And it shows you what these different options here. Custom nations are disabled if you have a historical setup. Normal setup makes historical nations, and then you can put a custom nation anywhere you want using normal nation spots. Random setup is actually pretty cool. This is a popular way to play custom nations. What it does is it randomizes the entire world. No longer have historical nations taking up the entire world. Instead, it's randomly generated nations that cover the entire thing. And that can be really cool for some very interesting games. And then you have custom setup, which is where only custom nations populate the map, which unless you want to create, at least a few dozen custom nations covering everything, then I wouldn't suggest it. Allow adding nations to a save game. Well, you want to be able to load up a save game and then create a custom nation in it. Simple as that. The random nations, this is once again a preference. You can have historical to where it's only historically nations that actually existed that it'll take based on the region that they spawn in. Or dynamic means it'll pretty much take the cultures, etc., of whatever region they're in and create nation names and whatnot based on that. That's it. It's just what do you want your names to, or what do you want your nations to be called? So that's kind of a basic overview of the different options you have for the game. So simple as that. There's a lot of information to it, but once you actually know how the different parts of Europa work, then these are fairly self-explanatory.